The biggest misconception people get is they think that your private equity partners, your venture partners are your friends. They're not. This is just a business. You may become friends, but they're incredibly talented at compartmentalizing. This is a bet we're making. A mentor of mine said it very well. They are with you until they're not. So many people make that mistake of thinking we're friends. They would kill you in your sleep and sleep like a baby. And that's their job. It's like a general who has to send troops to war. They have to be able to distance themselves. I think that's a big misconception. They're not your friend.
And welcome to the Venture to Victory podcast, where we look at the entrepreneurial journey from startup to exit. And we've got a great one today. I'm totally pumped up. We've got Dave Pennino in the house, founder and CEO of LogicSource. Dave, how are you?
Great. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's awesome. I'm really excited about the call we're going to have today. You've really had some incredible experiences, built an amazing company, raised a lot of money, and you've had some amazing stories that I've heard on other podcasts. I don't repeat them all, but for the folks listening on this call who are thinking about starting a company, or they're working in a startup as a senior leader, or they may be the founder themselves, this is going to really resonate because although there's a lot of wonderful things that happen starting a company, we all know being an entrepreneur has its roller coaster moments, and we're going to share some of those and how you got through that. So I'm really excited. Dave, I'd like to do a quick intro because not everybody's heard of a particular guest. And so let's rock and roll. Dave Pennino, you are the founder, president, and chief executive officer of LogicSource, the procurement services and technology company. You founded it in 2009. Since launching the company, LogicSource has raised an amazing $250 million, $250 million from some prestigious investors, VCs like FTV Capital, Pegasus Growth, Bain Capital Ventures, and Akartha Group. Under your leadership, LogicSource was built to optimize indirect, or what you would call not for resale spend, for enterprise organizations using a combination of procurement services and proprietary technology solutions. The company's been recognized on the prestigious Inc. 5000 list, achieving an unbelievable 150% three-year revenue growth. Prior to founding LogicSource, you served as a senior VP of corporate dev and strategic solutions at Williams Lee, amazing company. And then earlier in your career, you held leadership roles at Gartner and Scient. Dave also holds a Bachelor of Arts from Franklin and Marshall College, which is an amazing place that I have been to many times. So, Dave, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. Boy, that sounds impressive. It doesn't feel that way all the time sitting in.
Well, yeah, that's often the case, but you have your moments. I think in the end, looking back, it's probably all worth it. But we're going to find out if it is. We may ask that at the end. But as a background, just for someone that's unfamiliar with LogicSource, if you wouldn't mind sharing kind of who the company serves in terms of customers and what is the specific value that you bring to them.
Sure. So the premise behind the firm, and when we started in 2009, it's kind of held true almost 17 years later. Institutions and corporations, large and small, buy a substantial amount of stuff to be in business. And to oversimplify it, they buy things they sell, and they buy things that enable them to sell. So what do I mean by that? If you're a fashion retailer like an Aritzia, Lululemon, someone of that nature, you're the best in the world at buying fabrics, the merchandise you ultimately sell. And you have veritable armies of people in merchandising that do that. If you're a hospital system like Cleveland Clinic or Stanford Health, et cetera, you have people that buy heart valves and knee replacements and MRI machines and things of that nature. There's all this other stuff, depending on your industry, you call it indirect, you call it goods not for resale, you call it non-med surgical or purchase services, where it can be hundreds, if not thousands of categories of expenditures that are typically, not everywhere, but typically under-resourced in terms of the team, the technology, the data that supports those purchases. And that's things like marketing, corporate IT, facilities, maintenance and repair, distribution and logistics, corporate services like credit card processing and legal services and consulting. And we live there. So we help companies buy that stuff. And fast forward 17 years, we now have over 200 billion of spend running through the firm. So we have, as one of my CFOs put it, a bigger pencil. We have bigger volume. We have more frequency. So we might do a Microsoft negotiation 30 times this month, where a typical client might do one every 3 years.
Yeah.
So the combination of frequency in market, just size of our spend, the amount of data flowing through the firm, and then we have over this day about 200 category experts that are organized by category. We have more domain expertise than any of our clients would. And so with all that, ultimately we drive measurable and sustainable profit improvement that helps our clients a range of stay open to, be able to fund future initiatives, future growth, things of that nature, depending on their business.
Yes, I'm thinking of the example you gave of Microsoft. An individual company has a procurement person that's dealing just with Microsoft. That's the extent of their relationship, say one-on-one or the team. If I'm reading this correctly, because you represent multiple clients that obviously are probably working with Microsoft, I mean, obviously major player, you're able to leverage that knowledge as well with that relationship with Microsoft to help each individual company. Is that part of the scale advantage that
It
you
is. And,
have?
interestingly, most companies don't have somebody who knows Microsoft. Usually they have somebody I talked to an organization today that has 1.4 billion in indirect spend. They have two sourcing people.
Oh my
There's,
gosh.
there's no way you can, bottom out any contract. I mean, the odds of you knowing about waste management versus elevator maintenance versus window washing versus SaaS software and maintenance agreements versus trucking or ocean or rail with two people, it's not possible. So each one of these categories is really specialized. So not just having frequency in the market because you negotiate those things so often, but having data on what everybody else is paying, what terms and conditions they're offering, and having the domain expertise on the actual category is the magic sauce. That's what took $250 million, by the way, was
Right.
we raised that much money to be able to hire those kind of domain experts and build the systems, which are now all AI driven, that can push that 200 billion into those spend cubes to say what things should cost, what suppliers should be able to provide those services, what terms and conditions are best to market, et cetera.
So, I mean, those numbers are so gigantic when you're talking about $1 billion to spend. When you are pitching a client, are you able to do pretty quickly a fairly reasonable assessment of what the save on spend can be? Is that how it works?
It's a great question. And I can't answer it without taking a shot at my friends in the consulting industry. So I grew up at Gartner and, I had enough CIOs and CFOs say, thank you for the multi-million-dollar PowerPoint to actually do anything. And I wanted to get into a business where we got our hands dirty and actually did work. And everything we do is execution based. So we actually do the assessment work up front completely on our nickel. So we believe that if you're trying to drive efficiency in your organization, it makes no sense to start by writing a check. So we come in an investment-based sales model. We're saying, look, we'll spend $75,000 to $200,000 of our time, money, and resources to show you, rich with data, exactly how we can drive profit improvement and where. And will it be CapEx, OpEx, plan enabling? Will it be accretive in this fiscal year or next? And we do all that work for them so that they have a high level of confidence that we're right, but it also makes us commercially aligned. I want you to partner with us because you want this solution and you're ready for this transformational work. If you're not, then move it down the road and we'll find somebody else. And I think that's been a core tenet of our operating model. Don't sell people consulting, give them the advice and let them buy, the right answer going forward where we actually execute.
I had to just tell you quickly this funny story. What we were talking about when I worked at R. Donnelly for a while, and I was, one of the top sales guys there. They had spent about 2 million, I think, to bring McKinsey in, and they created this concept called the run rate reduction program. And the strategy was simple. All they did was bring in every vendor Donnelly ever had. They told them, we need to cut 100 million out of operating costs. How much are you going to cut? I would have loved to have known you 30 years ago.
Yeah. Well, and the problem with consultants is one, there's two fatal flaws with consultants, right? Well, as it pertains to procurement, they don't buy anything. So they're not bringing you leverage. They're not bringing you frequency. They're not bringing you scale. They don't buy anything. And two, they don't do anything. So they typically will say, here's what you should do. Remember that security monitor commercial years ago? I think it was ING or something that was like a guy in a bank that was getting robbed. And he's like, hey, there's a robbery.
I
They're like,
do
well, are you going to
remember
do
that.
something about it? And he says, no, I'm just a security monitor. I don't actually. That's what consultants are. Hey, there's a savings. I don't go get it. And if you don't go get it, Mr. Procurement Leader, you're at fault
Yeah.
because the board hired them. So the board's never going to admit they hired the wrong firm. They're going to blame the operators that are actually doing the work.
Yeah. Well, I think, there's been a lot of talk lately on podcasts and just posts that have been written all over about what's gonna happen to the consulting industry because a report that you would have paid $50,000 for and spent a week with, 5, junior partners on, the AI can do it in basically 30 minutes, and it's 90% there. So, I think you're in the right
It's
space as opposed to being in
interesting,
the
isn't it?
consulting space. It is.
Yeah,
Well, more
and
to
look, I
come.
mean, I don't know about you, but I tried to get Siri to text my CFO today, and she butchered every word and texted a former client, not my CFO. So this AI thing, we're doing a lot in it, but I'm still a little scared about how good the data is that it's organizing.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a problem that people are dealing with right now is if, when we're presenting business and it involves a lot of money, you can't have 90% accuracy. I mean, you've got to be at the 99%. You can't have false facts. And I've actually used 3 AIs together to verify each other. To try to make sure that it doesn't hallucinate and make mistakes that way. But yeah, more to come on that at that end. Amazing company. We could talk about procurement and LogicSource all day, but I really, for this podcast, I want to talk more about you and your experiences and what you went through to build this great company. Um, you've talked about this story before where you're a big goal setter and you set this goal of starting a company at 35, and you mentioned that you were 35, you hadn't started a company, and your dad called and said, "Hey, you set this goal for 35. I don't see any company. What's going on here?" So I'd love to hear a little bit about about that story because it is a
Yeah.
different approach.
No, look, and it's a true story. My father passed in 2018, but my dad, I'm sure he'd roll over in his grave if he knew this, but he kind of motivated me in a weird way. And that my dad made other people wealthy. And he worked for all the big guys, HP, IBM. He worked for Telecors and Femcon, and back in the day, Unisys and Spirit Univac. And I watched him fly all over the place and toil and be stressed. And I always saw the other people around him making an awful lot of money. And I thought, well, I don't really want to do that. I don't want to be employee housing. I want to go do something on my own. And when I was young, I was the kid that like shoveled every driveway in a snowstorm. I lived on a street that had a Baptist church on the right and a temple, a Jewish temple on the left. And on Sabbath, I would get paid back in the day like a quarter to 50 cents to turn on my Jewish neighbor's stoves and do all that stuff. And I was like 10, and I was like a paper route type of kid. And I had a
Yeah,
landscaping business through high school that we made like 16 grand a summer, mowing lawns in high school. And so I always had that entrepreneurial bug. Like I was that kid with goals. I want to make 100 grand by this. I want a lot of them are financial. I want to make 1 million by that. And
right.
35 was when I wanted to start my business. I did get that phone call. The truth was my father said, "Hey, wise ass, I thought you always hit your goals. You're 35." And we literally stopped that day and built a business plan. Uh, Still to this day, I almost can't remember. It's like when a shark's eyes roll back in its head. I almost can't remember how we did it and how we went to Bain. And I remember like pieces of it, but it was surreal.
And I have such a similar background. I mean, I did the exact same thing. Up at 7 in the morning, shovel. I knew everybody over the age of 70 in my massive neighborhood. Stood went right to those houses. My partner and I, at the time, built a lawn and landscaping business. Did it all through high school, same way you did. And he's now CEO of a big billion-dollar company out here in the Silicon Valley. So I think those entrepreneurial juices start flowing when you're young. Because one thing you learn from shoveling snow and cutting grass, as I did, was this idea of I can make huge amounts of money in short periods of time. So rather than get a job where I'm trading my time for money at a simple rate, I can look for project oriented work where I work less, but I get paid huge amounts of money. And so I think that I thought about that a lot growing up as well. Always wanting to get a piece of the action or, keeping more if you work for yourself. So very, very cool. What was something that you didn't really know when you start a company at 35 that you look back on, that nobody really tells you when you're about to start?
How long is this podcast?
Well, we could do Joe Rogan, go 4 hours if you want.
I mean, honestly,
Yeah,
everything I didn't
everything.
know. I mean, honestly, and I think especially a first time entrepreneur. I mean, I had a landscaping business. I did stuff like that. I That's not a,
No, but at 35, you
we
had a
got,
lot of
we got
business
eight,
experience.
yeah, we got like $8.5 million from Bain Capital Ventures. I quit my job. And I mean, right out of the chute, the answer to your question is I literally knew nothing. And it's actually a miracle that this worked. And as you know, most venture startups don't. And
Of course.
I had an incredible amount of luck. I had an incredible amount of mentors that stayed with me, that had incredible patience. I had an executive team that I don't deserve. I had a wife who was supportive, whether she knew it or not. Like, she just took the ride, and I'm not sure every day really knew what the hell was going on, but stayed the whole ride. I mean, nothing. I mean, we could have a category just on how the equity deal was formed and the lessons I learned there. You could have a category on hiring and contract, real estate. I mean, you name it. I tell everybody that's ever listened to me, we did 150 stupid things, and thank God 151 smart things. So we're up +1. I didn't know anything, and I would say there's still at least 2 or 3 times a week where I'm like, yeah, oh my God, I haven't dealt with this before.
Yeah.
So I could go on all day. I can go on all day. I mean, the minute we started the company, I thought I was being gracious. My old company owed me a large sum of money, and I thought I'd be a
Mhm.
good guy, right? And like, my first lesson was no good deed goes unpunished.
Right.
I manned up and told my CEO, I'm going to leave and start this company. And I feel like I need to tell you that before you write me this commission check. And guess who never got that commission check? And then he turned right around and sued me, and sued Bain Capital, and sued the agency that built our PowerPoint deck. He sued everybody to try to stop the company because he thought I was going to compete with him. My first lesson, I don't even think the wire had hit the bank.
Yeah, I mean, you learn that hard reality of the real world that way too. I remember I was gonna depart. I got recruited away for a very big job to another company, and I felt out of personal obligation, I needed to sit up in front of my boss who had hired me and tell him I was leaving. And everybody advised me, the other company, "Don't go ahead and do that. Just send a note saying that you're terminating, and this is it." And I said, "Well, as a man-to-man thing, I can't do that." I had 103 fever. It was pouring down rain, hailing, and I drove down there, sat in front of him, and said, "Out of respect for you and appreciation, I felt I have to tell you this in person." And he thanked me, shook my hand, said it was great. Before I got back to my house, he had called as many clients as possible to tell them what had happened and created some different story. And that's just the way the world is, you know. When you're on the team, you're part of the team. When you leave, sometimes you're considered the enemy. It's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. And that may dovetail into another question I had about leadership, which was I was listening to a podcast just the other day with Joe Lonsdale, one of the founders of Palantir, and he was saying that there's a big difference that he's observed between founders of companies and traditional non-founder CEOs of companies. And he was saying that founders have to be opinionated. They have to kind of have controversial world perspectives and sometimes even like a chip on their shoulder. And it kind of conflicts a little bit with this thought today about CEOs having to have a lot of human. And I just thought, like, if we're going to be honest, sometimes that humility is put on the back seat and people have a killer instinct. And it's that chip that really kind of drives them to greatness. And so I'd like to ask you, what was some of the toughest feedback or criticism that you received that was truly humbling to you that you had to deal with maybe for the first time? And how did you deal with that?
Yeah, and look, that's also one where I could tell you 100 stories, but I would say that there's two that come to mind. So I had that chip on the shoulder, by the way, can be a founder's biggest ally and their biggest enemy. And I think the reason why a lot of founders get executive chairman
Hmm.
is they can't figure out how to manage that chip.
Yeah.
A lot of founders don't get executive chairman; they just get taken out because they really
Hmm.
can't figure out that
For
chip. And
sure.
I'd say if you had the managing partner and my current, private equity partner on this, he'd probably say I'm somewhere on that journey of managing that chip, but I'm not all the way there. And I think it is a benefit and a curse. One, I had a group of board members who tried to take me out, probably in 2018, 19. 70 plus year old guy who tried to come in and take me out to run the company himself. The end of the story was there was a moment in the boardroom with my leadership team where he said, "That's it. It's either Dave or me." And it was my CFO who spoke first, and she said, "Well, sorry, it's you. You don't know any customers. You didn't hire any of the employees. It's you." So I survived that, and I ended up agreeing with our partners that we would buy the firm back, and that's when we got the Pegasus Capital deal. But the lesson and the humbling bit was, why did I let it get that bad? Right? I sat down with the leadership team after this is a long story I'm summarizing, but when we sat down, I said, "Look, I clearly let it get this bad. What do I need to do differently?" And they said, "Look, you're good at, three or four things, not 300 things. You need to get out of all these other things. You need to let us do our jobs. And if you don't think we're the right people to do those jobs, you got to bring in the people that can." And that day, I kind of got out of operations. I got out of a bunch of things that it weren't good at. I'm a growth guy, and I focused on that, and the business took off.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was really humbling to be told, "Look, love you, but you're a big part of the problem, and this almost happened to you for good reasons and bad, and we got to fix them going
Yeah.
forward." So that was a big one. I'd say this year, I'm a bit like a pound dog, and I told FTB Capitalists when they bought me, I've been hit so many times that you go to pet me, I duck. And I've been really hard on FTV Capital, and I finally stopped and said, "I'm not going to fight anymore, and I'm going to listen, and I'm going to seek to understand, that I'm going to assume good intention, and I'm going to, embrace the fact that I don't know everything, and these guys have returns that are about as good as anybody in private equity has, and they must know something." And it's been the most fun kind of 8 months since I just decided, stop it.
Yeah.
We're getting along. We're growing. We're making cool decisions. We've hired some people that are literally going to change the outcome. And it was humbling to just realize that I don't think I was wrong about everything I thought about. I was probably wrong about a lot of it, but fighting about everything, you can't move forward.
Yeah.
And that chip was becoming a blockade. And I remind myself every day, just stop, listen. How might we? Not can't, shouldn't, don't, won't.
Yeah. I don't know if you've mentored a lot of younger people outside of the company, but I particularly people that are starting companies, but I'm sure you'll notice that and you'll see it. That wisdom is going to be pretty important to them because it's interesting that you came to this conclusion after so many years in the role and having grown the company. It took that long for this realization, but it shows you that we're always growing and we can always evolve.
Hey, look, I've been married for 27 years too, and I think I'm still not good at yes, dear. Like, I argue about stupid shit. Like, if that's
Yeah.
what you want, then go get that if that's what you want. And
Yeah.
what am I arguing for? I'm burning so many calories. I don't know if
Well,
are you a Ted Lasso fan?
I am a Ted Lasso fan. My wife got me into it. I'm also a 25-year marriage, 4 kids type of guy too.
There you go. Well, if you remember the scene where Jamie Tart asks, "How do I get along with Roy Kent?" And Keeley just says, "I just agree with him." And
Well,
it's like, if you just say, "I think that's a good idea." By the way, most of the time it's a good idea.
yeah. Well, my one of my former bosses in my younger life, who was a great boss but hilarious. He had a wife, and they were discussing children, and he'd always joke and say, "Well, I wanted to have 2 children. My wife wanted to have 4 children, so we compromised and have 4." So
Yeah.
sometimes the yes dear thing does work. But hey, back to the investor thing real quickly, because one of the biggest issues for anyone starting a company is this issue of raising capital, and so. Um, I think it's more of an art than a science living out here in the Silicon Valley, seeing people pitch, seeing people try to network. And a lot of first time founders in desperation, they just need to take money. And, we've heard that idea of the expression dumb money or vulture capital. But I have seen personally, having, worked with a lot of boards and recruiting CEOs and presidents of that nature, there are definitely proactively good investors. And there's some investors that have a different perspective. I'm not going to say bad, but have a different view on it. What was one of the false perceptions that you had about investors and raising capital when you started?
Well, it was easier than I thought,
Okay.
which you might not have expected me to say. I was stunned when we went into Bain Capital Ventures with 17 of the worst PowerPoint slides you've ever seen in your life in 09. And I think I've never heard anybody dispute this. And I've said this for 17 years. I think we might be the only thing Bain Capital Ventures has funded from an idea. It was easier than I thought. And so that was a misconception for me. I think the biggest misconception people get is they think that your private equity partners, your venture partners are your friends. They're not your friends. This is just a business. And
Yeah.
you may become friends, but they're incredibly talented at compartmentalizing. This is a business. This is a bet we're making. And they're a mentor of mine said it very well. They are with you until they're not. And I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
so many people make that mistake of thinking we're friends. And I don't mean this as a disparagement to any of the partners we've had, but they would kill you in your sleep and they would sleep like a baby. And that's their job, right? It's like a
Yeah.
general who has to send troops to war. They have to be able to distance themselves because those troops may die. I guess a timely and unfortunate comment this week, but
Yeah.
I think that's a big misconception. They're not your friends. I think the other misconception is they're not all created equal, not even close. And some of them have very strong operating capabilities. Some of them just put a lot of bets on the table and hope a couple of them hit.
Yeah.
Sifting through that, some of them are going to introduce you to people to grow your company. Some of them aren't going to make one introduction. Some of them are going to force executives on you. Some of them are going to let you do your job. And that getting that culture right is really key. And I think a lot of people misunderstand that.
Yeah. We've had many cases where the board members call you up and say, "Well, we're going to be moving the founder out." May say it differently into another role, but it sometimes does shock me because you see a founder who has a lot of charisma, has a lot of loyalty at the company, yet they still feel like they need to bring somebody else in, and then the conflict kind of emerges. I would say definitely my experience has been there's been some wonderful ones and some that aren't great, but that idea of always coming into it that this is a strictly business at the end of the day. We're partners, but we're not best buddies is a good thing. I wonder if the reason Bain Capital funded you was because of maybe some history with the consulting side, looking at the idea made more sense, right? Because that's what the consulting firm would do. I wonder if that factored in at all, that history.
I think it was one, Jeff Schwartz, who was the founding, there's three founders of Bain Capital Ventures. Jeff was my rabbi, if you will, at Bain. I think really understood the business shockingly quickly and saw what it could be.
Yeah,
And frankly, 17 years ago, saw what we're doing now, which is using AI. We're almost able to build kind of a trading floor. We have so much data running through us that what we could do with the data. And I remember Jeff 17 years ago saying, I think the data that falls off the back of this business might be more interesting than the business pretty soon. So I think he had a vision for it. I think they also realized because they have four different asset classes and they own so much that driving efficiency in their own portfolio could be really interesting. I think it was
yeah,
also a very small bet. For them, 8 million bucks.
yeah,
And we were a little unique. There's not a lot of 35-year-old founders, right? They're either kids that are living on a couch in their flip flops eating ramen noodles who don't really care if it dies, or they're guys that made their money already and they're playing with house money. We were in the epicenter of we're gonna die trying because we're
yeah.
putting our entire families at risk. I mean, I had houses and cars and country clubs and stuff at 35. Like that, this was very risky.
Wow, wow. Well, they made the right bet, I guess. It all worked out.
We'll see. Yeah, it's still out there.
Yeah. So one of the things we always talk about, everybody goes through the near death experience, as we like to say. I know you commented before on the famous RICO lawsuit that was filed against you, the COVID disaster, but going through multiple near death experiences, what did you kind of learn from this that you could share with maybe somebody else who is struggling right now because they feel like, God, I just got hit out of left field. I don't know how we're going to survive. There is a mentality to overcoming the end of the life moment. What did you learn from those?
I'd say that the most common thing I say is don't let the highs be too high or the lows be too low. Now, I'm terrible at it, but it's great advice. Um, it I try to remind myself, and not to be dark, but one of my best friends growing up that I went to F&M with, and he passed at 50 from cancer, and he was fighting cancer
Sorry to
since
hear
he
that.
was 25.
Wow.
And I think about him a lot. I might be having a bad day or a bad week. He had a lot worse days and a lot worse weeks. And I try to keep perspective because sometimes we can become extremely selfish and think, why me? Like, what do you mean, why you? You run $100 million company. You're not worried about the electric bill. All your kids are healthy. Like, you're having a bad day. You'll be fine. And even with that RICO lawsuit, the idea of starting a company literally almost died. It actually died a couple times on the table and they revived it. I wasn't in trouble. I was 35 years old. I was the top sales guy at Gartner. I was the top sales guy at Williams Lee. I would have made a phone call and been employed again. Keeping the perspective of how big this problem is, I think, is important. Now, my darkest hour was, I mean, my wife and I left our house in a deed in lieu of foreclosure. I mean, we put everything into this company. And by the way, that was
Wow.
2019. That was
Wow.
2019. That wasn't 2009.
Yeah.
And that was the hardest one because I felt like I put my family at risk and they didn't really have a choice. But even now, as I look back on that, we recovered very nicely. And there were some serious blessings that if that didn't happen, these other six things wouldn't have happened. And I guess it's the everything happens for a reason concept. And, nobody pitches a perfect game, as a mentor of mine once said, and just, keep swimming.
Yeah, I always say that you don't leave the movie, generally speaking, in the middle because a scene is kind of emotionally disturbing to you, right? I mean, you have to let it play out. You can't see the future from the present. And often when you look backwards, you see how the interconnectedness of all these different events and what they meant to your life. I've heard so many stories from founders who got fired, thought it was the worst day of their life. But that was that impetus to go out and push something and do something on their own. And looking back, they said, whether it was a God, the universe, divine providence, but what seemed like one of the most terrible moments in my life actually was the beginning of one of the greatest. And so
I agree.
maybe being an eternal optimist helps, or what you had said earlier, back to the famous tennis player Arthur Ashe. They had asked him once because I think he died of leukemia at a relatively young age in his 40s. And they said, you ever ask yourself, why me? And he says, no, 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 no. I always ask the opposite. Why not me? Meaning, why am I so special that the law of probabilities don't affect me, right? It's just life. That eternal optimist attitude. That is one thing I think you have to be as a startup founder. You have to be an optimist because so many things are going to hit you that come out of left field. And if you don't have that ability to always see the silver lining, it's just going to flow downhill and you're not going to make it. So I think that's an
Yeah,
important quality I've
yeah,
observed.
it's funny. There's two. I was a big baseball fan. There's a story behind that too. But back during the famous Yankees Red Sox rivalries, I listened to Mariano Rivera speak, and he would talk about how you had to have a very short memory to be a closer. And then Terry Francona once said, to date myself, about the Red Sox. You remember Manny Ramirez, the home run hitter for the Red Sox? They asked Francona one time, why doesn't Manny ever slump? And Francona, with like a big dip in his mouth, said, slumps are mental and Manny don't think. And, I think sometimes as a founder, you just have to almost just have a short memory and just put your head down and run right through it because you just can't stop and wallow or you will die. I mean, you just
Yeah.
can't stop. So, and all these people, one of the things that Brad Bernstein, our managing partner, just recommended I read Founders Keepers. And one of the things that I took a bunch of things from it, but one thing I took from it is whether you like it or not, everyone's watching.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your kids are watching, your board's watching, your employees are watching, your friends are watching, and you can't let everything get you down or you'll change the weather. And
Yeah.
I have been guilty of that. And I think you got to keep going.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's an important leadership quality, and you obviously have it. And eternal optimism is important. So, but on the leadership side, that as someone who runs a recruiting firm, I always like to get the perspective on intelligence and leadership qualities in individuals. Your perspective. Day used to be like people talked about intelligence in terms of like IQ, technical smarts, thought leadership, that type of thing. And today there's a whole new category where we've kind of recognized that there's many forms of intelligence, from EQ to empathy, even charisma is an aspect of that. From your experience, do you feel the soft skills are more important today than hard skills in terms of assessing true leadership capabilities.
Absolutely. And we talk about it a lot here very simply as walking around sense
Yeah.
in terms of EIQ. Empathy is a huge one. I'm in the people business. I mean,
Hmm.
it's a huge one. Decisiveness is so we talk about executive courage,
Mm.
incredibly important internally and externally. You can have the smartest person in the world, but they're not courageous. They can't have hard conversations. But we talk about commercial sensibility all the time. Do you understand how we make money? Do you understand the ramifications of your decisions? And then that walking around sense. I mean, in our business, I think a lot of businesses that are scaling make the mistake of, and I think sometimes their sponsors and their board members push them in this direction to go for these really big resumes. And these are gritty businesses. These are businesses where, if you need the conference room painted, you say what color. It doesn't matter what your title is, right? Still, at this scale, they're very entrepreneurial. We fly 3, 4 times a week, every week. So I've been burned so many times by the great resume with the really impressive firm, and they fold like a lawn chair in a hurricane trying to work around here. We just work too hard. So you need people that are gritty, and I think the single hardest thing to do as a entrepreneur is how do you maintain ownership culture as you get to year 16, 17? That equity is not 2 cents a share anymore, right?
Yeah.
So how do you do that? And I think that's the hardest thing. And I think there's just people out there who are gritty and willing to grind because that's how they were just wired. And there's people out there that are coin operated. And if you're not giving them the coin, they stop operating.
Well, I think that culture, though, is somewhat built top down. The near death experiences that you overcame. I'm sure the teams that you build, as you said, you focus on those characteristics. It's tougher in recruiting because sometimes companies they want the perfect resume, right? And I always tell people that bringing someone who is perfect on the operational functional side of things is great, but sometimes if you just stick to that as the initial criteria, you're going to miss the most important part, right? Which is who can keep a team together, who can recruit the best team. As you said, leadership, courage, executives with courage. That's a really interesting take on things because when you act courageously, you will have massive victories, but you also will have some failures. So you have to, if you're going to encourage courageousness, then you have to have a culture that accepts some failures at the same time. And I'm sure you've dealt with that.
Absolutely. We hired a guy years ago, a dear friend and very, very bright. And he was a guy that got over this, but he had spent a number of years at Accenture as employee 483,000 or whatever the hell it was back then. And we asked him where we should build a second site for our center of excellence, a lower cost environment, do the work. He did the most brilliant work I've ever seen. Consultants are good. He looked at Park City and Denver and Dallas and Minneapolis. They did this amazing analysis of where we could build that shared service center. And then he did this really, I thought, creative LinkedIn overlay where he looked at the senior most procurement job of the CPO and how many of them were there in that geography. So for example, there was 80 in Park City, which meant that's not a lot. There was like 1,300 in Dallas, and every other job fell off of that. He did this amazing work. And I said, okay, great. Which one should we pick? And he couldn't do it because he spent so many years in committees at Accenture. And by the way, he got over this within like 6 months of working here because his intellect and his courage were there. We just had to get him out.
Yeah.
But in this kind of a business, we need to go now. Like, are we going left? Are we going right? What are we doing? And if you have somebody who needs a committee and they won't work in an early stage company.
Yeah, so true, so true. We talked a little bit earlier about being married for a long period of time and having a lot of children. There's this old saying that you can chase two rabbits, but you can't catch both. So, with a wife and four kids, first of all, I would not wish five angry women. I think you have four daughters. Is it four
I
daughters,
do
right?
have brothers.
I
Luckily,
would
they're
not
not all
wish
angry.
plus the wife, and you may have a female dog in there
I
too. I
do.
have
She's
one.
right there.
Okay, so 6 angry females because you're not giving them enough time and attention. I would not wish that scourge upon anyone. How did you actually manage the balance of all that when you were building this company and going through that? Or did you just looking back say, hey, I missed some opportunities, I missed some events, I missed some games, and it was very, very difficult. How did you go through that and handle that? Is there anything looking backwards that you kind of regret that you would have done differently?
Yeah, I'll start at the end. I think this journey has created 4 daughters who are incredibly independent, who and that my wife is very much that way too. My father always said, "Marry somebody who wants you, doesn't need you." And my wife's incredibly independent. Never once said, "What, you have to travel?" Even if there was a weekend event, never once. I mean, in 27 years, and I'm not exaggerating, never once.
Amazing.
She understood how this all works. She understood the journey. She also knows me, and this is who I am. And if you stop me from doing it, I'm not going to be the right person. That's just who I am. And because she's incredibly independent, you know, who the heck wants to spend every day with me? So go back on the road. In fact, she's famous for when I'm home too long. She does this thing where her fingers kind of fold back, and she says, "Doesn't somebody need you somewhere?" But it works, right? And she's an incredible mom, and she's raised 4 amazing daughters that I don't take any credit for, but they've watched this journey and they're very entrepreneurial. They know you can do whatever you need to do to raise money. You don't have to go work for somebody. You can go build it. And they get involved here. We're building an office in Charleston right now, and my second oldest daughter and my wife are doing the entire build out.
Wow.
My daughter's a senior at University of South Carolina. My oldest daughter is working for a very early stage supply chain and procurement business in the United Kingdom. So
Wow.
I think in the end, look, I missed a lot of stuff for sure. And I know I did. Like that, don't let the highs be too high or lows be too low, or like that, slumps are mental, don't think. I don't spend a lot of time dwelling on it. It is what it is. And my job was to raise kids that could contribute to the world, not necessarily be their best friends. And if I got both, I succeeded. And I think I'll get both. And yeah, I missed some stuff, but I also showed him some stuff along the way.
Yeah. Well, you're still a relatively young man, and so there's always time, and those relationships sound like they're intact. So it sounds like you've built a great family and you built a great company, and that's pretty exciting, Dave. I learned a lot. Again, I'm in a similar situation. I learn a lot from my guests. There's that camaraderie, sharing those experiences as well. Hey, this has been amazing. I always like to end this podcast. It is called the Venture to Victory podcast with a single question. And Dave, that is, what does it mean to you in business and family or life to truly be victorious?
Such a great question. The answer changes over the years. I would say when I started this, it was all monetary. I wanted to be one of those guys at Bain that was giving us the money, and I'd say today, not because I became one of those guys. I didn't. They all have way more money than I do. But I'd say today I keep score on victory. I think one of the coolest things we've done here is, I think now it's almost 450 people feed their families because we started this company. And I think about my kids, who I had 2.5 of them when I started this business, and I have 4 now, but they don't really know anything but this. And I think about other members of my team that this is what their kids remember. This is, how it works. And the way we didn't talk about this, but we have absolute Cadillac benefits. We pay 90% of them for our employees. Like, we're able to do really cool things that, to me, that's the stuff I keep score on, is
Yeah.
the careers we've created, how big our 401k matching has become, the compensation we've been able to provide, the jobs we've created. That I love that.
Yeah, I mean, success and being able to take care of the people that are around you who helped you build it up is just an amazing, I mean, it's one of those amazing feelings that not everybody gets to share. So that's incredible. And I would say too, if you have 5 women in your life that love you, that's pretty victorious.
I thought you were
Usually
going
you're
to say I
just
got to
looking
keep
for
working,
one.
because that's
Yeah.
true too.
Yeah, you'll work for a long time. Well, this has been amazing. I appreciate you. So many great stories. We could talk forever, but it's been a wonderful discussion, and much success moving forward in 2026.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
It was a pleasure, Dave. Cheers, everybody.
The Venture to Victory podcast is provided by MatchStar Venture Search. If you're interested in any of our open executive roles or need help sourcing world-class talent for your company, check out our website at matchstar.com.